Hi everyone. Today I'll provide a brief introduction or an overview of what a map is and several common types of maps. So in this course, you will primarily use choropleth maps, which is a type of thematic map, and we'll get into that later on. We all probably have an understanding of what a map is, but it's important to understand the what and why of maps. So maps are much more than a tool to help you get from one place to another. They can define problems, help people reach solutions, and ultimately spur action. So a simple definition is that a map is a representation of a place. So this carries two important implications that are sometimes neglected. So the first, a map is not an objective depiction of reality. It is a symbolic interpretation, or it's a model of reality of a place and highlights the relationships between elements in space that are either perceived or actual. It reflects choices, biases, and agendas of the mapmaker. When you see or make a map, think critically about it. What does the map show? What does it omit? And why? How are the data collected and manipulated or produced for the end results? Those are only a couple of things that affect how a map ultimately is interpreted by its readers. The practice of reading a map is as much about the practice of creating a map is as much about removing things as it is depicting them. So a map does not and cannot represent everything in the place that you're mapping. Things must be omitted or simplified and so forth for the map to make sense. This is how a map achieves clarity and usefulness. It strips away details of the world so that the map's purpose shines through. So maps fall into two categories. So reference maps emphasize the location of spatial phenomena such as counties, cities, rivers, and so forth. So chances are the maps you use most in your daily life are reference maps. For example, Google Maps, Street Maps, there's old Thomas maps that used to be in cars that help you see where things are. Other common reference maps emphasize physical landscapes. Think about topographic maps or maps of the national park. Thematic maps, which we're going to primarily be using in this class, emphasize the spatial patterns of geographic attributes or some statistics about places and relationships between places. So for example, while a reference map might show the location of cities, a thematic map might also represent the population of those cities. A reference map might show bank locations, while a thematic map shows average income in an area. It's the difference between mapping places and mapping data. Thematic maps are almost always associated with storytelling of one kind or another. So in this course, we'll be focusing on thematic mapping. Cartographers use many methods to create thematic maps, but we'll be looking at four of the more common types here. But you should also familiarize yourself with other types in here. So in these four maps shows where people live in Oregon, but each map uses a different method to show that distribution. So there's dot density maps, and they place a dot somewhere within that county. The exact location of that dot is not the exact location of what you're mapping. It's just contained to that geographic area, in this case counties. Choropleth map, which we're going to predominantly use in this class when you use ArcGIS Online and other kind of mapping software. So each county is shaded a quantity or a color to show the density or the number. So this is population per square mile. So the darker the color, the more people. The lighter the color, fewer people. An isopleth map, which we're not going to use so much in this class, but is another type of thematic map showing population. Iso means the same, pleth, and so this is kind of showing where people live. And graduated circle is one that represents how many people live in that county. So for example, the larger the dot, the more people, and you will be using graduated circles They're also called proportional symbols too, depending on how they are mapped. So here's an example of how these thematic maps are made. This just so happens to be a Toronto census tract. There are census tracts throughout the United States as well. In Ada County, Canyon County, they all have census tracts. And each census tract, the U.S. Census Bureau collects populations about us every 10 years, and then they do estimates in between. But we can look at here and we can see the numbers, which represent the population for each census tract. And if you were to just kind of look at this, it's quite confusing. You couldn't really say which census tract has the most and fewest people. But here we can use a choropleth map, and we can quickly see areas that have the highest population. So the question then comes in this map is this useful? Because we're mapping the number of people. Generally speaking, the larger the geographic area, and these being census tracts, so the larger census tracts potentially could have the more people. Here is another map of the same data, but we are mapping it by population per square mile. So we are normalizing this data. So you always want to map your data being standardized, and that will be coming to you in ArcGIS Online and other software that you use. It will most likely be the percentage. Gives you a very different feel of the map. So you can see the darker areas are kind of towards the south part of Toronto, and this is the downtown Toronto and around Toronto University. So always use a rates. And that's here, choropleth map rates, not totals. You're not going to be doing too much mapping in this class other than the data that's already presented, but it's just a good thing to understand. On that note, have a great day.